This is DrAlvinCom, the business of wisdom, where world leaders and thinkers do come to chat. Very fortunate to have the international best-selling author, Bishop George Davis. He happens to be the pastor of Faith Christian Center of Jacksonville, Florida. Today's book is Passing the Test of Life, Lessons to Get Unstuck and Prepared for Where You Want to Go. We always like to ask a couple of personal notes there. First of all, we are familiar with your extraordinary bishop, Bishop Keith A. Butler. From your perspective, a lot of persons don't know the broadness or his skill sets. What about him has allowed you to observe and follow and to be a part of his life?
Wow. I came to Word of Faith as a late teen, young adult. My wife had been there since she was about 12 years old. We met in college and came home to visit her church during one break, and was just profoundly blessed and impressed by just the teaching of the Word of God. He's a strong leader who is someone who is as determined as a person can get. And growing up in a home without a father figure immediately present, I learned in the first probably 6 months of being a part of the church just what real manhood was about, and how to care for a wife, and how to take care of responsibility. So I'd say really beyond what people see on the outside, which is the amazing teaching gift and political responsibilities and other things that he's been a part of. He really is a genuine man who leads his family, and that really impacted my life. Far beyond what I do publicly, what I learned privately, and what it's taught me as far as being a husband and a father privately, really was the most impactful of everything that I've received from Bishop Butler.
You mentioned the word impactful. It seems like everything he touches, at least from an outside observer, turns to gold, and all his organizations, everyone who seems to have observed his tenets, do very well. A lot of persons use the title of bishop, and when you're around the things of God as long as I have, you see people use it and they misuse it. But truly, if there's a person who is a bishop and who establishes bishops, is him. Again, from a management perspective, what are some of the things that you learned, the little things that has allowed you to explode and to grow where you are in Florida and in your states?
Well, and under Bishop Butler now, I want to say, I think I've lost count, but I want to say there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 or so churches that have been planted here in the United States and abroad, as far east as Bulgaria, countries in Africa. And when we first started planting churches under Word of Faith, it was 1993. I believe it was the first church that was planted in Atlanta. And then we planted a church in Mississippi in 1995. And then our church in Jacksonville, Florida, was the third church that was planted in 1996. And when that church was planted, I was a 26-year-old kid still in my mind, heading out the door. But I honestly headed out to plant a church feeling as prepared as a person could feel. Now, I was so young that I probably didn't know how big a risk technically I was taking, leaving my home city of Detroit and heading out to Florida. But being under his tutelage and really watching how he dots every I, crosses every T, sitting in meetings behind the scenes, watching how decisions were made, how both from a business perspective he always made sure things were right, but then also making sure that truly caring for the needs of people. One of the biggest things I think I've gotten from him on the ministry side is to really just always exalt Jesus and never let it be about you, never let it be about shining forth your own name or trying to make yourself more popular, but really caring for the people that you have the privilege of serving and taking the low road, if I could say it that way. Certainly God will elevate you and give you opportunities, but not attempting to let yourself shine. And so having an organization that now over the last 19 years or so, as I said, have planted somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 churches, I believe it is. It really helped me to understand the process of starting something from ground zero. And so since being in Florida, we've actually now planted churches as well. The church I pastor, I'm privileged to pastor in Jacksonville, but we have a church now also in Orlando, Florida, one in Tampa, Florida, Miami, Florida, Tallahassee. Then we have two churches in Georgia, one in Hampton and Valdosta, and then one up the East Coast in Norfolk, Virginia, as well as a church we started last year over in Piura, Peru, that have all come out of the umbrella of our church there in Jacksonville. So his umbrella is a large umbrella and then has smaller umbrellas under it as well.
Today's book is entitled Passing the Test of Life. I wanted to discern, you have several tenets that you have the test. How did you come up with those particular ones as the one? I mean, how couldn't it could have been 3 or 30 or 50? Why the number that you chose?
Well, it probably is 30 or 50, and I'm certain that there are other tests that I did not enumerate, and it really is kind of a jump start to help believers start thinking in a way that helps you to understand that when situations happen in your everyday life, there's generally a reason behind it, and not to what I call waste a good problem. You know, if you're going to go through a problem, have to deal with a situation, at least learn the lesson from it. And so I don't doubt that there are a number of tests that we enumerate in this book, but it certainly is not an exhaustive list. These are tests that, as a pastor and then just as a Christian, I've noticed that I found myself dealing with some of these same challenges, and at times in my Christian walk getting frustrated because it seemed like I've just went through the same situation. Why is this type of thing coming around again? Different city, different circumstance, different characters that are part of it, but it's essentially the same type of situation I had dealt with before. So really based on just the volume of seeing the same situation recurring over and over again, I determined these were the tests that seemed to be most prominent. Someone else is writing the same book or similar book. They may have 20 tests or 7 tests, and they may be a different grouping. But even if they had a different grouping, I think a person would still walk away with the same concept that things happen for a reason, and certainly not because God is the one making you go through a test. He knows us from the inside out. The very hairs on our head have been numbered. There's no reason for him to test us when he already knows everything about us. But just life sometimes will throw tests at us.
Let's look at chapter number 1, the self-test. The self-test gives believers an opportunity to look into the mirror of love and determine how they rate in comparison to Jesus. Elaborate on the self-test.
Well, the self-test is really kind of a grow-up test. It allows you to really get a gauge on where you are in your spiritual development. All of us spiritually, just like we are naturally, we come into the world not as grown-ups. Adam and Eve were the only two that we know of that came onto the scene already fully grown. But the rest of us, we go through this process of birth and then to maturity. And just like natural children have a tendency from infancy, they're not concerned about anything else. If that baby's diaper is wet, they want it to be changed. They don't care if you're in the middle of a church service, if you're sitting at a movie theater. All the attention is naturally drawn to them. And as they become 2-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 9-year-olds, that should start to wane away. And what happens spiritually is the same thing is true. When we're first born again, we first experience a relationship with Christ, we're kind of focused in on ourselves. It's an inward focus. We're trying to get our own life in order. We're trying to evaluate ourselves and make changes in our own lives to line up with the will of God for our lives. And even when it comes to what our own personal needs are, we get real inner focused. But then the more we grow and the more that we develop, we should grow to a place to where we're not just concerned and consumed with me, myself, and I, but we really have a chance to mature to a place to where we have a heart for reaching other people, we have a heart for ministering to other people, and we have a heart for seeing the gifts and talents that have been placed in our lives turn around and be a help and a blessing to someone else. And so there really is a self-test, and all of us run into these opportunities where, if given a chance, we can respond in a way that brings greater benefit and glory to us, or we can respond in a way that really helps the general masses, using our gifts and talents, sometimes inconveniencing ourselves. And that really is a big part of this self-test. All of us, especially in our wonderful country, United States of America, we are blessed in so many ways that we don't even sometimes consciously realize it. And that can be a double-edged sword. One side is great, but the other side is that we could really get so comfortable that we stop thinking consciously that we are here for a bigger purpose than just consuming and and buying and enjoying, but we're really here to let every gift and talent that has been given to us help someone else. And sometimes that does mean inconveniencing yourself. And I think all of us take that self-test, on a regular basis, where we have to evaluate, am I focusing on my own life and my own self in an inappropriate way, or are there some things that I need to allow myself to be inconvenienced in so that I can be a benefit to someone else?
We're talking about passing the tests of life, lessons to get unstuck and prepared for where you want to go. Another personal note, I noticed that substantially on your website and throughout the book, you like to talk about, is it the month of the year, April, or is this your wife? You like to talk about her, sir.
It's the month of the year, but it's also my wife. My wife is April Davis, and we have been married. This July will be 19 years. Been together for 23 years. As I said before, we met in college at Michigan State University. I was a sophomore, and she was a young freshman coming onto campus, and I thought that I could use all of my smooth 1980s ways to woo her, and in reality, she wooed me and was the greatest impact on changing my life after Christ.
The time test. The purpose of the time test is to give the person being tested an opportunity to grow in faith. So if I want to grow in faith, I must have some time?
You must have some time, but also must realize, again, in that process of growing up, that everything doesn't happen right away. Another lesson we learned in dealing with children is that children have a very short attention span, can be very impatient. If they're crying or frustrated about something, they want it right now. Taking a road trip for us as an adult that may take only an hour seems like 7 hours to a child in a car. And in the process of growing up as spiritual children to adulthood, learning how to be patient, learning how to acknowledge the fact that even when we prayed and we're trusting God for things to work out in our lives, that the Bible teaches us that you have need of patience so that after you have done the will of God, you might receive the promise. And patience is really learning how to be consistently the same, even when there's nothing exciting or wild going on in your life. And one of the things that I noted and learned in my early Christian walk is that it seemed like when I first got saved and first got committed to Christ, I would pray about things, and in a matter of days, sometimes hours, it seemed like it would work out. And then the more I matured, it seemed like I would pray for things, and it wouldn't be days; it might be weeks. And then over time, there'd be times it seemed like I'd pray for things, and sometimes it would take a lot longer than days, a lot longer than weeks. And learning to pass the time test is really learning to be patient enough to realize that if you prayed about it according to God's Word, God is faithful and just to fulfill His Word. His Word will not return void. But a mature Christian does learn that you have to be patient, which means I'm going to get up and be the same way. I'm not going to go into a fit of this depression or discouragement. I'm not going to start acting in a mean way toward my family or friends around me because things haven't worked out in the time that I anticipated. But I'm going to be the same. I'm going to continue to praise God, continue to serve God, continue to keep a smile on my face. And that is a part of passing that time test, that I don't have to have everything work out in 24 hours in order for me to still be committed. I've really noticed in these times and days we live today that there are a lot of Christians who have this conditional Christianity. If God does this for me, then I'll serve Him, then I'll be committed, I'll be happy. And really there's a place of maturity where we understand that, yes, God is a good God. He wants to bless our lives. He wants to increase us. But however long it takes and however patient I have to be, I'm going to serve God the same way if He never did anything else. Because the reality is, if He never did one more thing for us, the fact that He loved us enough to send His Son, Jesus Christ, to die for us is enough for us to be committed to praising Him for the rest of our days.
You mentioned children a few moments ago. I look at Dr. Fred Price. He was able to have a great transition between him and his son. I see with Bishop Butler, him and his son. What are things you're doing? You have 3 wonderful children that you can pass your legacy on, because it can be really challenging. I have another friend with the Crystal Cathedral. He has problems with his children. He ends up losing his church. What can you do, or what things are you praying about so that the transition is smooth between you and your family?
Well, obviously in every pastor or CEO or business leader's situation is unique, because each of us are unique individuals, and our wives and our children are unique as well. I have 3 children. I have a daughter who will be 11 in October, a son who'll be 9 in August, and then our youngest son will be 5 next month. And my wife and I have both taken a position that we want them to be whatever God created them to be. If that happens to be, pastors or happens to, take steps toward ministry, then great. But we will neither suggest it, recommend it, encourage it, or discourage it. We'll do our best to train them in line with, their gifting. As Proverbs talks about, train up a child in the way he should go. Literally, it refers to training them up in accordance with their natural bent, the natural giftings and talents that God has placed in them. And that's what we really feel our job is, to raise our children where they have a healthy and complete respect and honor for God, for their parents, for authority in general. And then be sure that, we develop the gifts and talents that God has naturally placed within them. And we both believe that if we do a good job of that if ministry is a part of what God has for their future, that He'll naturally at the appropriate time direct them in that path without us needing to urge them or push them along. And the other thing that I've personally made a commitment of, and this is probably the most important thing to me after my relationship with Christ, is that there's nothing in my life more important than my family. My personal relationship with Jesus Christ is first and foremost. Then after that, it's my family, and that's way before ministry. That's way before business. That's way before business opportunities. And I personally believe that if I just keep my priorities right, not saying that anyone else who has experienced challenges didn't have their priorities right. I mean, raising children today it's a soup. It's not an entree. There's a lot that goes into it. But I just personally believe that if I keep my priorities right, that we keep our focus on serving God personally, but then also on taking care of our family as our highest priority, and then allow ministry and business and everything else to come, somewhere after that, it'll also establish within our children that they are far more important than what we do ministerially and what we do professionally. And I believe that also leaves a lot of room for them to hear, God speaking to them if the time does come that, ministry is a part of their future.
We're listening to extraordinary Bishop George Davis, the name of the best-selling book, Passing the Tests of Life, Lessons to Get Unstuck and Prepared for Where You Want to Go. Now, notice at the end of each one of these chapters, there is a discussion starters. Tell me about those discussion starters.
Well, I'm a firm believer that it's tough to do life alone. Accountability is one of the pieces in the body of Christ, and just in life in general, that's important. We live in the loneliest generation ever known to mankind. I've done some study, and just a lot of people today suffer from loneliness. Though we have cell phones on everybody's hip has a cell phone. We have all the social media. You can update your friends and post pictures and keep them constantly aware of where you are and what you're doing. Yet we still are a very lonely generation as a whole. And the discussion starters are really intended so that a person reading the book doesn't go at it alone. We've got a lot of book clubs who are buying the book, and they're going through the book together, taking a chapter at a time, reading the chapter, and then taking the time to discuss the questions and determining what can they do personally to help each other stay accountable and pass each of the tests. And so that's really the intent of the discussion questions at the end of each chapter, to provide a vehicle for a person that is not going to try to go at it alone, not going to try to pass each of these tests alone, to really allow them to be able to endeavor to pass these tests together.
We're talking to the extraordinary Bishop George Davis. Now, in chapter number 5, you have the lot test. The purpose of the lot test is to reveal whether you are willing to completely remove yourself from the sins of your past and never return to that life. And then you begin to talk about, you mentioned earlier when you was meeting your wife at Michigan State University. Tell me about some of those days there, because you give a great story there with that particular lesson.
Well, the Lot test, we all remember Lot and more importantly, Lot's wife. Lot found himself in the middle of a wicked place, a couple cities called Sodom and Gomorrah, and God made the decision that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He sent 2 angels to urge Lot and his family to leave those 2 cities before destruction fell down. And Lot reluctantly, really had to get kicked out of those 2 cities. And as they're headed out, the angels warned them, do not look back. And the story is, Lot's wife turned and looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. And the Lot test really is one to determine whether or not, as God frees us up from a number of challenges from our past, because all of us have things from our past that are good, but we all have things from our past that probably have been a hindrance to us as well. And once God frees us and allows us to begin walking in a greater level of victory, it's a real challenge at times to not turn around and head back to things that we've been freed from. The Bible talks about the proverb that the pig returns back to the mud trough. A person that has been freed has a tendency to want to turn back around and kind of relive the good old days. The only problem is usually the good old days are not as good as we remember them being. If they were that good, we wouldn't have been looking for a way out of those good old days. And so the Lot test really helps us to grow to a place where we understand that God may have done some good things in our past, but there's a lot more good things in our future. And I met my wife, as I said, at Michigan State, and during that time I was a part of a particular fraternity there on campus. I was the president of my fraternity. I would like to think I was kind of a big man on campus. I certainly had a lot of friends and was involved in a lot of activity on campus. And for me, I had been going to church my whole life, so it wasn't a matter of just starting to go to church. I believe when I left the hospital, my parents went straight to church. I don't even know if we went home, because all I remember is always being at church as a kid. But though I was at church, I was there on Sundays, but wasn't living the life throughout the week. And so when I met my wife at Michigan State, she took me to her church, and I'm started to being taught the Word for the first time, and I'm really understanding what this Christian life is all about. The greatest fear that I had is that, I'm living this good life now, making sound decisions now, but I had this fear that I was going to wake up one day and I was going to be right back, doing things I said I would never do again, making mistakes I said I'd never make. And for me, it was necessary for me to put some distance between me and some of the elements in my life at that time that I knew had enough pull on me that I could, end up making some bad choices. And so that's part of the Lot test. I think all of us have things that once we do make a commitment to Christ, that we probably need to separate ourselves or put some distance. Doesn't mean that you turn your back on all your friends and family, but recognizing that everybody has to realize where they're strong and where they're weak. And for me, I knew I wasn't strong enough to still try to hang out with the same crowd, still try to go to the parties, but just not participate in some of the activities. So I had to put enough distance between me so that I could get strong enough. And now, once I got to a place where I was strong enough and mature enough to where I genuinely had grown to where the issues of my past were no longer a temptation, no longer a draw to me, then I was able to reconnect with, some friends and acquaintances that I hadn't, spent much time with. And what I was able to do then is have my life be what the Bible, describes as salt and light. I was able to now have an influence on them and shed light on them, not in a condemning way, but in an encouraging way, allowing them to see that, hey, if he could do it for me, then certainly he could do it for you as well. But, the temptation to, pick up the phone and call that old friend on a day when a person's feeling lonely, or to go back and, try to reminisce and visit in an old neighborhood, for many people has been their downfall, because they got set free from Egypt but turned around and went back to take another peek at Egypt and found themselves stuck right back in the same place again.
We're talking about passing the tests of life, lessons to get unstuck and prepared for where you want to go. So I have $15 in my hands. Now, I got one option. I'm watching TV right now, and they say if I take $15, I can go to Dave & Buster's. Or I can take the $15 and buy a copy of Passing the Test of Life. So why should I take it and give it and buy you a book opposed to going to Dave & Buster's, sir?
Well, Dave & Buster's is a good place. I enjoy going there. But if you go there and you spend your $15 at Dave & Buster's, when it's done, it's done. You take that same $15 and spend it on purchasing Passing the Test of Life, and it's going to give you some eternal value. It'll start to help clear up for you, why am I in this place? Why does the situation seem to keep coming around? Why do I feel stuck? Why is this happening to me? That really is the essence of what this book answers. Why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? Why am I seemingly dealing with this same situation over and over again? And I believe that what will happen is if that $15 that you invest into purchasing Passing the Test of Life, and actually read it, because it's one thing to buy it, The next step is actually take the time to invest the time into getting this information into your heart. But if a person takes the time to get the information to their heart and really allows God to open up their eyes to give them some clarity, then I believe that life will become so good for that person, and the $15 will become an investment that will produce a harvest, and you'll find yourself at Dave & Buster's, but a lot happier this time at Dave & Buster's or wherever you choose to go, because you'll really be experiencing victory. You know, the hallmark and really the theme for my ministry is born to win. And I really believe with all my heart that God created each one of us as winners with a plan in mind for us to gain victory, and He doesn't want us living a frustrated, discouraged, depressed life, but getting answers is really what helps to pull us out of that situation.
For a person who wants to get a copy of this book and a person who wants to connect with you, how can they do so?
Well, the book is available at your local bookstores. Should be available at your Barnes & Nobles, Books A Million, certainly on websites like Amazon.com. At your local Christian bookstores, it should be available. And if it is not, what better time than to ask them, can they please go ahead and get the copies into the bookstore? And certainly anyone who would love to connect with our ministry and find out more about what we're doing, and maybe even if they're looking for a church home in one of the cities that we have a church planted, they can go to our website, which is fccjax.com, and there's a ton of information there that will allow them to become more familiar with our ministry, and certainly would love to correspond. I'm also available on Facebook. Would love to connect with them and be able to share more information. We are going to be doing some book signings across the country that the publisher is still establishing dates and times for that. So for those who get the book, we'd love to see them at one of the book signings when we're in their area.
Well, thank you so very much for sharing these powerful truths and tenets. This will be featured at DrAlvinCom, The Business of Wisdom. I get a wonderful chance to talk to world leaders and thinkers all over the world. Also, this will be featured on my Facebook page, DrAlvin.com. And you continue to have a remarkable, amazing day, Bishop.
Thank you, Dr. Alvin. Thanks for the opportunity, and you do the same.